The young, courageous hero, the damsel in distress, the cackling villain. There are some characters that are as old as stories themselves. Welcome back to the next episode of the Young Writers Vlog. We're continuing our talk about creating and using characters in stories. We're going to start this week by talking about character archetypes. There are many ways to approach talking about character archetypes, from the way they're described by always incorrect Aristotle to the strange psychology of Carl Jung. But to keep things simple, we're going to keep our focus on archetypes and the function in storytelling and how they work to create iconic characters. But what is an archetype? An archetypal character is a typical or even stereotypical expression of a character type. They're characters that appear frequently in the stories of a particular culture. Archetypes are a broad definition of a very specific character type defined by the role that they have in a story. A good example of how archetypes shape fiction is when you investigate one of the most popular ones, the hero archetype. They're the protagonist, they're larger than life, they have extraordinary abilities, and they use those abilities to vanquish evil or make the world a better place. A lot of our oldest stories have their protagonists based around this hero archetype. Characters like Achilles, Hercules, Beowulf. You even have Don Quixote, who exists as a parody of this archetype. All of these heroes come from vastly different cultures and were created thousands of years apart from each other, but they share a lot in common because of how the hero archetype passed itself down through stories. Ancient stories persist and these ancient characters persist, and our idea of what a heroic protagonist looks like is inevitably bound by what has been done in the past. We read stories and we hear stories like Hercules and understand that that's what a hero acts like, and then if we tell another story about heroes overcoming evil, we use what we've heard about Hercules, about other heroes in other stories that we've heard, to inform the way we tell stories in the future. This is essentially how archetypes recreate themselves, how archetypes are formed. When one character type or even one particular character becomes so well known and so well respected, it influences an entire culture's way of interpreting that character or interpreting stories in that vein. That character starts to influence all other characters that follow them. One of the best examples we have this in modern memory comes from Superman. A character that follows the heroic archetype has a lot in common with Hercules and Beowulf and Achilles, these classic heroes of old. But it was done in a slightly different way and ended up being so popular that it essentially spawned an entire new genre of storytelling known as the superhero comic. And so archetypes are important because whenever you're using a character to fill a particular role, whether that's an extremely general role as a protagonist or a villain, or a specific role like an old man you meet across the street, it's important to realize that your audience is going to compare that character to other characters like it. Whether it's conscious or not, they're going to have expectations about what this character is going to do, what they're going to act like, what they're going to look like, based on these archetypal ideas about how these characters are supposed to be. So whether you're following an archetype or explicitly rejecting it or trying to create something new, it's important to realize that it's still going to be compared to similar characters. You can't make a spy character that uses strange gadgets and extraordinary physical ability to get out of hairy situations without that character being compared to James Bond. It's going to happen. And this is why it's important to understand how archetypes function, because you have to recognize that certain things have meaning outside of the meaning that you have given them. Even if the character in your story is entirely unique and one that you've created completely out of your imagination, if they share significant characteristics with very popular, very well-known characters, they're going to be seen as similar to those characters. If you make a giant muscular brute with a soft heart, you are not the first person to make a character that's somewhat like that, and the audience will already have preformed ideas of what those kind of characters are like and what kind of roles they have and how they speak and how they act. And if done well, your character can be a part of this collective idea of what role these characters have. It can be the character that your audience will compare other different characters to. And this essentially is what archetypes are. It is how your audience comes to understand your character based on their experience of similar characters. Virtually any character in any piece of fiction can fall into some archetype simply because the archetypes themselves are drawn so broadly that it's quite easy to apply them in any situation. Though this isn't to say that archetypes are bad. They are basic tools by which stories are understood, and it's impossible to avoid them. But it can be very useful as a tool for your writing to understand that this is happening when your stories are being read, that your characters are going to be interpreted with this kind of bias. If you understand how these archetypes are going to influence the way your audience will see your character, you can correct for it, you can adjust for it, and you can make characters that specifically interact with these expectations. See, archetypal characters, like the 7 basic plots I talked about in my first videos, are a very basic form that a character can take. They're very simple expressions, characters that are easy for the audience to pick up on and understand. Therefore, it can be very useful to make characterization happen very quickly, because the audience is just going to assume that your talking snake is a bad guy. They just are. So you don't have to spend that much time convincing the audience that this is a bad character. And essentially, the only way to understand how archetypes function is to read and consume a lot of media, and also pay attention to how people talk about media that you've consumed, how they come to understand characters based on even limited information. As always, as a writer, it's important to stay connected to the media that you're working in, to read as much as you can, to consume media in the genre you're publishing in, because it helps you understand what the audience is exposed to, what kind of expectations they're going to have, and can give you hints on how they're going to interpret the things you're going to throw at them. How archetypes function and how they're perceived is slowly but constantly changing. Every new story that a person reads or experiences changes their way of interpreting those kind of characters. And whenever a particular story becomes massively popular, those characters start to become archetypal characters. They start to codify an entire genres to come. And so all you can really do is pay attention. So thank you for joining me on this week of the Young Writers Vlog. Join me next time when I talk about the physicality of characters, how they speak, how they act, how they talk, and how you can use that to inform the reader of their characteristics. Until then, have a good night and keep on writing.